Ethan, an 8-year-old with a strong sense of right and wrong, always believed in protecting those he loved, no matter how hard it might be. One day, on what should have been the happiest day of his father's life, Ethan makes a choice that changes everything. As he watches his dad, Sam, about to marry Grace, a woman with dark secrets, Ethan steps forward, revealing a truth no one could have seen coming. His brave move halts the wedding in its tracks, but what unfolds next leaves everyone shocked. Why did Ethan's revelation create such a stir? How did a young boy manage to uncover the truth about his father's fiancée? And what impact did it have on their lives? Stay tuned to find out, and before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from and if stories of honesty and bravery inspire you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of the small chapel, casting a warm glow over the guests, who whispered excitedly and glanced toward the entrance. Up at the altar, Sam stood tall in his crisp black tuxedo, a nervous smile on his face as he waited for his bride. "You look great, Dad," whispered 8-year-old Ethan, nervously fidgeting with the pillow in his hands. Ethan's dark curls were neatly combed, and his little suit matched his dad's perfectly. But while Sam radiated joy, Ethan's brown eyes were full of worry. Sam smiled down at him and gave a reassuring wink. "Thanks, buddy. You're the best ring bearer a dad could ask for," he said, gently ruffling Ethan's hair, not noticing the anxiety written across his son's face. As the first notes of the wedding march began, everyone rose to their feet, looking to the chapel doors to see the bride. But Ethan's eyes stayed on his father, his small hands clutching the ring pillow so tightly his knuckles were white. The doors opened, and Grace entered in a glowing white dress, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders and her blue eyes bright with emotion as she walked down the aisle. Sam's face lit up with admiration. "You look beautiful," he whispered when she joined him at the altar. She gave him a soft smile, replying, "I can't wait to start our life together." The officiant began the ceremony, his words filling the air, but for Ethan, each second stretched out painfully. He shifted from foot to foot, glancing back and forth between his dad and Grace. To most, his nervousness seemed like ordinary jitters, but there was something deeper, something urgent, in his eyes. After his mother's passing 2 years ago, it had been just Ethan and his dad, Sam, trying to get by together. The idea of someone new coming into their lives made Ethan feel uncertain and anxious. When they arrived home that day, Grace was waiting on the porch, her golden hair catching the last rays of afternoon light. She gave them a warm smile, and Ethan couldn't miss the way his dad's face lit up at the sight of her. "Ethan, this is Grace," Sam said with a proud smile. She's very important to me. I hope she'll be important to you too." Grace knelt down to Ethan's level, her blue eyes sparkling. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Ethan," she said softly. "Your dad talks about you all the time." For a brief moment, Ethan felt a small hope. Maybe this change wouldn't be so bad. But as the weeks passed, that hope began to fade. When Sam wasn't around, Grace seemed different. Her warm smiles turned to cold stares, and her friendly tone disappeared. One evening, when his dad was working late, Grace was in charge of dinner. As they sat at the table, Ethan tried to start a conversation. "Miss Grace," he said hesitantly, "do you like space? We're learning about the solar system in school and—" But Grace cut him off sharply, her eyes still on her phone. "I'm busy right now. Just eat your dinner quietly, please." Ethan sank into his chair, pushing his food around his plate. The silence felt heavy, and he wished his dad were home. When Sam was there, though, it was a completely different story. Grace would laugh at Ethan's jokes, ask him questions about school, and even ruffle his hair affectionately. But Ethan could sense something wasn't right. Her smile seemed strained, her eyes hiding something. Sam, on the other hand, looked happier than Ethan had seen him in years. He practically floated around the house, humming and occasionally breaking into silly dances. "Isn't Grace wonderful?" Sam would often say, his eyes bright with excitement. "We're so lucky to have her, right, buddy?" Ethan would nod and force a smile, not wanting to burst his dad's bubble of happiness. But inside, he felt more alone and confused than ever. As months went by, Grace's true nature started showing. When Sam wasn't around, she'd make subtle, hurtful comments. "Oh, Ethan," she'd sigh at a mess he made while working on a project. "You're quite a handful sometimes. I don't know how your dad manages." Or when Ethan showed her a good grade, she'd respond, "That's nice, but there's always room for improvement." Each remark chipped away at Ethan's confidence, making him feel like he was a burden in his own home. He began to withdraw, spending more time in his room, avoiding the common areas of the house where Grace would be. One Saturday afternoon, 3 months before the wedding, something happened that Ethan couldn't forget. Sam had gone out to run errands, leaving Ethan and Grace alone. Ethan was in the living room, watching cartoons and sipping juice, when Grace walked in. "Turn that off," she snapped, waving at the TV. "It's too loud. I'm trying to work." Startled, Ethan fumbled for the remote, and in his rush, he knocked over his glass, spilling juice all over the coffee table and carpet. "I'm sorry," he cried, quickly jumping up to grab some napkins. Before Ethan could finish apologizing, Grace was there, grabbing his arm tightly and yanking him away from the mess. "Look what you've done," she hissed, her face twisted with anger. "You clumsy, careless boy." Her fingers dug into his arm, and Ethan winced, tears forming in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whimpered. "I'll clean it up, I promise." Grace's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You'd better," she growled. "And if you breathe a word of this to your dad, you'll be very, very sorry." "Got it?" Ethan nodded frantically, his heart racing as she finally released him. With shaking hands, he hurried to clean up the spill, feeling more alone than ever. Later that evening, when Sam returned home, Grace greeted him at the door with a cheerful kiss and a bright, "How was your day, honey?" Ethan watched from the stairs, rubbing his arm where she had grabbed him. He wanted so badly to tell his dad what had happened, but fear held him back. What if his dad didn't believe him? Or worse, what if it made Grace angrier? As the wedding day got closer, the weight of his secret grew heavier. One evening, about a month before the big day, Ethan finally mustered the courage to talk to his dad. Sam was in his study, sorting through paperwork, when Ethan knocked on the door. "Come in, buddy," Sam called, looking up with a smile as Ethan entered. "What's on your mind?" Ethan hesitated, nervously twisting his shirt. "Dad," he started slowly, "can I talk to you about something?" Sam set his papers aside and turned his full attention to Ethan. "Of course, you can tell me anything." Taking a deep breath, Ethan blurted, "It's about Grace. I don't think she likes me very much." Sam's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? Grace adores you." "No, Dad. She doesn't," Ethan insisted, his words spilling out in a rush. "She's different when you're not around. She ignores me, and sometimes she says mean things and—" "Whoa, slow down," Sam said, holding up a hand with a sigh. "Look, Ethan, I know this is a big change for you. It's normal to feel uncertain about Grace joining the family. But I promise, she cares about you very much." "But, Dad," Ethan tried again, but Sam shook his head. "No buts, buddy. Grace is going to be your stepmom, and I need you to give her a chance. She's doing her best, just like we all are. Okay?" Ethan's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Okay, Dad," he murmured, turning to leave. "Hey," Sam called after him, his voice softer. "I love you, kiddo. We're all going to be just fine, you'll see." Ethan closed the door behind him, feeling a wave of hopelessness. His dad, the one person he trusted the most, hadn't believed him, or worse, maybe hadn't wanted to believe him. From that day on, Ethan stopped trying to tell his dad about Grace's behavior. Instead, he withdrew more into himself, becoming quieter and more distant. Family dinners and outings became something he dreaded, knowing he'd have to pretend everything was fine while silently enduring Grace's little jabs and cold indifference. Caught up in wedding preparations and his own happiness, Sam didn't notice Ethan's change. He chalked up the quietness to shyness or maybe just a phase, never realizing the turmoil simmering beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Grace seemed to revel in her victory, secure in the knowledge that no one suspected a thing. With Sam oblivious to Grace's true nature and Ethan too afraid to speak up again, Grace became bolder in how she treated him. One afternoon, Ethan overheard her talking with a friend named Karen. "I don't know how you do it," Karen was saying. "Playing mom to someone else's kid? I couldn't handle it." Ethan froze in the hallway, holding his breath, listening closely. "Oh, it's not so bad," Grace replied, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Ethan? Well, he's part of the package, isn't he? You have to take the good with the bad." Karen laughed. "You're a saint. If it were me, I'd have sent the kid off to boarding school by now." Ethan didn't stick around to hear more. He crept back to his room, feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. Part of the package, the bad. Was that all he was to her? An inconvenience she tolerated just to be with his dad? As the wedding day crept closer, Ethan felt increasingly trapped. Sam and Grace made plans for their future. Honeymoon destinations, redecorating the house. Without considering how these changes would affect him, he felt like a ghost, invisible and unimportant in the life they were building. One sleepless night, Ethan tossed and turned, watching the red numbers on his digital clock blink 11:42 p.m. Unable to sleep. He got up to get a glass of water. Padding down the hall in his Superman pajamas, he suddenly froze, hearing a low, angry voice from the living room. It was Grace, talking on the phone. "Mark, you need to listen to me," she hissed. Crouching low, Ethan peeked around the corner. Grace paced back and forth, her free hand nervously raking through her disheveled blonde hair. "We can't rush this. Everything has to be perfect," she said, sounding frustrated. Ethan's heart raced. He had never heard her sound this agitated before. She was always so composed, especially around his dad. "The wedding is in 2 weeks," she continued sharply. "After that, we go to phase 2. Yes, the insurance policy. Sam doesn't suspect a thing." Ethan's mind spun with confusion, but he couldn't pull himself away. "Just stick to the plan," Grace snapped. "Once we get the money, we'll be set for life. No more close calls or scams. This is our way out." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Money? Scams? What was she talking about? Grace's voice grew harsher. "That brat Ethan is the wild card," she growled. Ethan flinched at her words. "He's too observant for his own good. But don't worry, I can handle him. Sam is wrapped around my finger." He'd never believe a word against his precious fiancée. Tears pricked at Ethan's eyes. He'd always known Grace didn't like him, but hearing her speak about him like this was crushing. Just as he began to pull away, Grace's tone hardened. "Just be ready," she warned, her words final. 2 weeks after the wedding, we strike. Sam won't know what hit him." With that, she ended the call. Ethan scrambled back to his room, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she would hear it. Diving under his covers, his mind reeled with what he'd just overheard. Grace was planning something terrible, and it involved his dad. Something about money and an insurance policy. He didn't understand it all, but one thing was clear. His dad was in danger. That night, sleep didn't come. Ethan lay awake, replaying her words, feeling helpless and terrified. Ethan lay awake all night, replaying Grace's words over and over in his head. When morning finally came, he stumbled to the breakfast table, bleary-eyed, where Sam and Grace sat looking like the perfect happy couple. "Morning, champ," Sam greeted cheerfully, ruffling Ethan's hair. "You look tired." "Rough night." Ethan nodded, avoiding Grace's gaze. "Just couldn't sleep," he mumbled. Grace's syrupy voice cut through the air. "Oh, poor thing. Probably just excited about the wedding. Aren't you, Ethan?" She looked at him with a smile, but for a split second, he saw something cold and calculating behind her expression. A shiver ran down his spine. "Yeah," he lied, forcing a smile, excited. Over the next few days, Ethan kept a close eye on Grace, noticing small things he'd missed before. She was always on her phone, texting furiously. Whenever Sam entered the room, she'd lock her screen quickly and smile brightly. "Just chatting with the wedding planner," she'd say, or "Oh, bridesmaid drama." But Ethan knew better now. He caught glimpses of her phone sometimes, with messages popping up from someone saved as, Mark, he guessed, the man from her late-night call. Grace's absences from the house also became more frequent. She'd leave often with vague excuses, sometimes for hours, just running out to finalize a few wedding details. She'd chirp, kissing Sam on the cheek, or meeting the girls for a last-minute dress fitting. Sam, blinded by love and busy with work, didn't question her at all, but Ethan noticed every detail. One afternoon, about a week before the wedding, Ethan was helping Sam in the garage when Grace's car pulled into the driveway. She hurried inside without even glancing in their direction. "I'm going to grab a snack, Dad," Ethan said, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. Sam nodded, focused on fixing the lawnmower. "Sure thing, buddy. Grab me a soda too, will you?" As Ethan entered the house quietly, he heard Grace's muffled voice upstairs. Curious, he crept up the stairs, careful to avoid the creaky third step. "Almost there, Mark," she was saying. She was in the guest room, soon to be her and Sam's room after the wedding. "Just a few more days. Keep your shirt on." Ethan inched closer to the door, holding his breath. "The policy is ironclad," Grace continued. "Once we're married, it'll be easy. A tragic accident, a grieving widow, and we're set for life. Just stick to the plan." Ethan's blood ran cold. "A tragic accident?" Were they planning to hurt his dad? Suddenly, Grace's voice dropped to a whisper. Desperate to hear more, Ethan leaned in too far and bumped against the door, causing it to creak slightly. The room fell silent, and Ethan's heart raced as he heard her footsteps approach. "I've got to go," Grace said abruptly. "I'll call you later." Ethan scrambled down the hallway, ducking into the bathroom just in time as Grace opened the guest room door. He held his breath as her footsteps paused outside, then continued down the stairs. Finally breathing out, Ethan slumped against the bathroom wall, his heart pounding. This was worse than he had imagined. Grace and Mark weren't just after his dad's money. They were planning to hurt him. He had to do something. But who would believe him? His dad thought Grace could do no wrong, and she had made it clear that she'd twist anything he said against him. For the next few days, Ethan stayed on high alert, watching Grace's every move, waiting for the right moment to stop her sinister plan. Ethan watched Grace's every move, trying to piece together her plan. She was careful, but sometimes she slipped up. One evening, he walked into the study just as Grace was hurriedly closing his dad's laptop. She jumped when she saw him, a flash of guilt crossing her face. "Oh, Ethan," she said, her voice overly bright. "You startled me. I was just checking some wedding RSVPs." Ethan nodded, not believing a word. The moment she left the room, he moved to the laptop. It was locked, but he knew his dad's password, his own birthday. The browser history was cleared, but one tab remained open, a website for a major life insurance company. Ethan's stomach churned. This had to be the policy Grace had mentioned. As he was about to dig deeper, he heard footsteps. Quickly, he closed the laptop and pretended to be looking at the bookshelf as his dad walked in. "Hey, sport, what are you up to?" Sam asked, smiling. "Just looking for a book," Ethan lied, feeling a pang of guilt at how easily he was deceiving his father. Sam ruffled his hair affectionately. "That's my boy, always with his nose in a book. Come on, dinner's ready." As they walked to the dining room, Ethan's mind raced. He had to find a way to stop Grace. But how? The next day, he got his chance. Sam had a last-minute work meeting, and Grace was out on one of her mysterious errands, leaving Ethan alone in the house. With shaky hands, he opened her sleek silver laptop. It was password-protected, of course. He tried her birthday, the wedding date, nothing worked. Just as he was about to give up, he noticed a yellow sticky note tucked under the laptop, with a string of numbers and letters written on it. Heart-pounding, Ethan typed in the code. The laptop sprang to life. Ethan's eyes widened as he scrolled through her files. There were dozens of documents with suspicious names. His dad's schedule, policy details. He clicked on one labeled insurance policy. A PDF opened, full of legal jargon he couldn't understand, but a few phrases stood out. Accidental death, double indemnity, $5 million payout. Ethan's hands shook. Was $5 million really what his dad's life was worth to her? He continued searching, finding a folder labeled Mark. Inside were dozens of photos of a tall, dark-haired man with a scar above his left eyebrow. In some photos, he was alone. In others, he was with Grace, looking very much like a couple. Ethan felt sick. Grace wasn't just planning to hurt his dad. She was cheating on him, too. Suddenly, he heard a car pulling into the driveway. Grace was back. Panicking, Ethan closed everything and shut down the laptop, replacing it exactly as he'd found it just as the front door opened. "Ethan?" Grace called. "Are you here?" "Yeah," he replied, doing his best to keep his voice steady. "Just doing homework." Grace appeared in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she looked around the room. "Don't you usually work in your room?" she asked. Ethan shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "It's quieter here." She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then gave a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, don't work too hard. Dinner will be ready soon." As she turned to leave, Ethan caught a glimpse of her phone screen. She was texting someone, the contact name simply M. That night, as he lay in bed, Ethan's mind whirled with everything he had discovered. Ethan had discovered the terrible truth. Grace and Mark were planning to kill his dad for the insurance money. They were going to wait until after the wedding and then stage some kind of accident. The weight of what he'd uncovered felt overwhelming. He was just a kid. How was he supposed to stop two adults from carrying out such an evil plan? And with the wedding just days away, time was slipping by fast. Ethan thought about telling his dad everything, but a wave of doubt stopped him. Would Sam even believe him? Grace had spent months creating an image of Ethan as jealous and difficult. Would his dad trust him over the woman he was about to marry? As he tossed and turned in bed that night, Ethan made a choice. He couldn't sit by and let this happen. Somehow, someway, he would stop this wedding. He had to save his dad. With that resolve, he finally drifted off to sleep, but his dreams were haunted. He saw Grace and the man from the photos, Mark, laughing over a grave, his father's grave. Ethan jolted awake, drenched in sweat, just as the first light of dawn crept through his window. In that moment, as his nightmare lingered, Ethan knew what he had to do. He would stop the wedding no matter what it took. Now, back at the wedding, as the officiant began speaking, his words blurred in Ethan's ears, drowned out by the panic growing in his chest. He knew he had to do something, say something, before it was too late. If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The officiant's voice rang out, the traditional words hanging heavily in the air. This was his chance. But fear froze him. What if he was wrong? What if no one believed him? What if he ruined everything for nothing? The officiant gave a slight nod, about to continue. Ethan's heart pounded in his ears. It was now or never. Wait! The word burst from his lips before he could stop it. Stop the wedding! A collective gasp rippled through the church as all eyes turned to Ethan, who stood trembling, his small voice echoing in the sudden silence. Ethan? Sam turned to his son, confusion and concern on his face. What's wrong, buddy? Ethan's eyes darted from his dad to Grace, who stared at him with shock and a barely concealed anger. He took a shaky breath, forcing himself to keep going. Dad? Ethan's voice quavered, but he pressed on. You can't marry her. She's not who you think she is. Sam knelt down, gently placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. What are you talking about, son? Are you feeling okay? Ethan shook his head firmly. No, Dad, you don't understand. Grace, she's been lying to you. She's planning something bad. A murmur spread through the crowd, and Grace let out a nervous laugh, her eyes darting between Sam and the guests. Oh, sweetie, she said, her voice sweet but tense. I know this is a big change for you. It's okay to feel a little scared about having a new mom, but this isn't the way to express it. Ethan felt anger flare at her dismissive tone. No, he shouted, his voice stronger. That's not it at all. I heard you on the phone with Mark. I know about the insurance policy. You're planning to hurt Dad. The church fell completely silent, the air thick with shock. Sam's face paled, his eyes wide with disbelief. Ethan, that's a very serious accusation, he said, his voice unsteady. Where did you hear such a thing? I overheard her. Dad, Ethan pleaded. Late at night, she was talking to someone named Mark. They were talking about money and insurance, and how they were going to get rid of you after the wedding. Grace's laugh was higher-pitched now, a note of hysteria creeping in as she tried to keep control. A hint of desperation crept into Grace's voice. Sam, honey, you can't possibly believe this. It's ridiculous. Mark is my wedding planner. Of course we've discussed insurance. It's for the ceremony and payments to the caterers and vendors. Ethan must have misunderstood, but Ethan wasn't backing down. No, that's not true. I saw the insurance policy on your computer. It's for millions of dollars if Dad dies, and I found pictures of you with Mark. He's not just your wedding planner. The crowd erupted in whispers, some guests looking shocked, others concerned. Sam stood frozen, looking back and forth between his son and his bride-to-be. Grace's face had lost its color, her mask of calm slipping. Sam, she said, reaching for his hand, her voice pleading. You know me. You know I'd never. This is absurd. Ethan is just a child. He doesn't understand what he's saying. Sam's brow furrowed, torn. He looked at Ethan, his voice slow and serious. Ethan, these are very serious things you're saying. Are you absolutely sure about what you heard and saw? Ethan nodded vigorously, his eyes filling with tears. I'm sure, Dad. I would never lie about this. Grace has been mean to me for months, but only when you're not around. She makes me feel terrible, and now she's planning to hurt you. Please, Dad, you have to believe me. Sam's face was a storm of emotions. Confusion, hurt, disbelief. He turned to Grace, his voice low and tense. Grace, is there any truth to this? Any at all? Grace's composure cracked, her eyes darting around the church, taking in the shocked faces of the guests, the stern look of the officiant, and Ethan's pleading expression. For a moment, she looked like a cornered animal. Then, in an instant, her face hardened, her mouth set in a grim line. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "I don't have to stand here and be accused by a spoiled brat who can't handle sharing his dad's attention." She turned to the crowd, addressing them in a falsely sympathetic tone. "I'm so sorry you all had to witness this tantrum. Clearly, Ethan has some issues we need to address as a family." She glanced at Sam. "Maybe we should postpone, just to help him adjust." But Sam cut her off, his voice quiet but firm. "No, Grace. I think we need to address this now. Because if there's even a shred of truth in what Ethan's saying..." Grace's eyes flashed dangerously. "You can't be serious. You're going to believe the wild fantasies of an 8-year-old over me. Your fiancée, the woman you love." Sam looked troubled. "I love my son too, Grace. And Ethan's never lied to me. Not about something like this." He paused, the realization dawning on him as he looked back at her. "And he's not the kind of kid to make up stories. Especially not something this serious." Ethan felt a wave of relief. His dad was listening to him. But Grace wasn't finished. "This is absurd," she cried, her voice rising, desperate. "I've done nothing but love you, Sam. I've tried to be a mother to Ethan. And this is how I'm repaid. With baseless accusations and suspicion." She turned to Ethan, her eyes blazing. "You little brat," she hissed, forgetting herself. "You've ruined everything." A collective gasp rose from the audience, and Sam's eyes widened in shock at her outburst. In that moment, he saw a side of her he'd never seen before, and it chilled him to the core. "Grace," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what have you done?" Grace's expression flickered with panic as she tried to backtrack, forcing a strained laugh. "Oh, Sam, can't you see? This stress, it's too much. Ethan's outburst, these ridiculous accusations. I just lost my temper for a moment. Surely you can understand." But the damage was done. Sam took a step back, his eyes fixed on Grace's face. "No," he said slowly. "No, I don't think I can understand. Because the Grace I thought I knew would never speak to my son that way, no matter how upset she was." Turning to Ethan, he knelt down to look him in the eye. "Ethan, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." With all eyes on him, Ethan began to speak. He told his father about Grace's coldness when they were alone, the cruel comments, the way she'd grab him roughly, the conversations he'd overheard, the suspicious times she'd disappeared. He described finding the insurance policy on her computer and the photos of her with Mark. As Ethan spoke, Sam's face grew pale, and the guests listened in stunned silence. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others nodded, as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. Grace stood rigid, her eyes darting between Sam and the exit as Ethan's story unfolded, her composure crumbling completely. By the time he finished, she looked like a completely different person from the radiant bride who had walked down the aisle just minutes before. "Is this true?" Sam asked, his voice heavy with betrayal and pain. "Grace, look me in the eye and tell me none of this is true." Grace's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her eyes, once warm, now held only cold calculation. In that moment, Sam saw the truth, and it broke his heart. "I think," Sam said, his voice trembling, "that this wedding is over." The church erupted in a flurry of noise as guests rose from their seats, some moving toward the exits, others crowding closer to hear what was happening. In the chaos, Grace seized her chance. With a frustrated snarl, she turned and bolted down the aisle, her white dress billowing behind her. She pushed past shocked guests and made a break for the church doors. "Stop her!" someone shouted, but Grace was quick. She burst through the doors and into the bright sunlight, leaving behind a scene of complete chaos. Inside, the guests buzzed with shock and speculation. The once joyous occasion turned upside down. Some rushed outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fleeing bride. Others huddled in groups, whispering furiously and casting anxious glances at Sam and Ethan. Reeling from the revelation, Sam snapped into action, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. Dialing 911, he spoke in a trembling voice. "Yes, hello, I need to report a crime. My fiancée, she was planning to kill me for insurance money. She just ran from our wedding. Please, you need to find her." As he gave the dispatcher Grace's description and last known direction, Ethan stood rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by the events he had set in motion. A mix of relief and anxiety churned in his stomach. He had saved his father, but at what cost? Sam ended the call and turned to his son, his face a blend of conflicting emotions. He knelt down, placing his hands on Ethan's shoulders. "Ethan," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you sooner. I should have seen." Ethan threw his arms around his dad's neck, burying his face against Sam's shoulder. "It's okay, Dad," he mumbled, his voice muffled. "I'm just glad you're safe." Sam held his son tightly, letting the reality of what they had just escaped sink in. Sam hugged his son tightly, tears welling in his eyes. For a moment, the chaos around them disappeared, and it was just father and son, united against the storm. But their moment was interrupted by the arrival of the police. 2 officers entered the church, their presence immediately silencing the crowd. The guests turned to watch, their murmurs dying down. "Mr. Taylor?" one of the officers asked, approaching Sam and Ethan. Sam stood, keeping a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Yes, that's me. I'm Officer Johnson, and this is my partner, Officer Rivera," the officer said. "We need to ask you a few questions about what happened here." As Sam began recounting the events, Ethan's attention was drawn to a commotion near the church entrance. A tall man with dark hair and a scar above his left eyebrow was trying to push his way inside, looking frantic. Ethan's heart leapt into his throat as he recognized the man from Grace's photos. It was Mark. "Dad," Ethan whispered urgently, tugging on Sam's sleeve. "That's him. That's Mark." Sam's head snapped up, his eyes following Ethan's gaze, and he quickly recognized the man from Ethan's descriptions. "Officers," Sam said swiftly, pointing toward the entrance. "That man by the door, I think he's involved in this. He's the one my son overheard Grace talking to on the phone." The officers reacted immediately. Officer Johnson stayed with Sam and Ethan, while Officer Rivera moved quickly toward Mark, who had begun to back out of the church. "Sir, stop right there," Officer Rivera called out. Mark froze, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal, then bolted in a panic. Officer Rivera gave chase, shouting into his radio for backup as he sprinted out the church doors after Mark. The wedding guests watched in stunned silence as the officer vanished outside, chasing the man who had suddenly become part of the scandal. "Mr. Taylor," Officer Johnson said, his voice calm but firm, "I think it would be best if you and your son came down to the station to give a full statement. We'll need to gather all the evidence you have about Grace's plans." Sam, still looking shaken, nodded. "Of course, whatever you need." He turned to Ethan. "Buddy, are you okay to go with us to the police station?" Ethan nodded bravely, though his heart was pounding. "Yeah, Dad, I want to help." As they prepared to leave, Sam's best man, Jack, approached them, placing a comforting hand on Sam's shoulder. "Dave," he said, glancing around at the confused guests, "what do you want us to do about all of this?" Sam ran a hand through his hair, looking overwhelmed. I don't know, Jack. I guess just tell everyone to go home. Apologize for me. I can't deal with this right now." Jack nodded sympathetically. "Don't worry about it. I'll handle everything here. You just focus on yourself and Ethan. Okay?" Sam managed a faint smile. "Thanks, Jack. I don't know what I'd do without you." As Sam and Ethan left the church with Officer Johnson, they could hear Jack addressing the crowd, his voice steady and reassuring as he explained the situation and asked everyone to return home. The ride to the police station felt surreal. Ethan sat quietly in the back of the police car, watching the familiar streets of his hometown pass by in a blur. Everything looked the same, but somehow, everything had changed. Sam sat beside him, uncharacteristically quiet, his eyes unfocused as he stared out the window, processing the day's events. At the station, Sam and Ethan were led to a small, plain room with a table and a few chairs. Officer Johnson assured them it wasn't an interrogation room, just a quiet space where they could talk without interruptions. For the next few hours, Sam and Ethan recounted everything they'd experienced with Grace. Ethan described overhearing the phone calls, her cruelty when Sam wasn't around, and his discovery of the insurance policy and photos on her computer. Sam, still in shock, filled in details about their relationship, trying to trace when things had started to go wrong. As they spoke, more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Grace had suggested increasing Sam's life insurance policy just a month after they'd gotten engaged, claiming it was for Ethan's future in case something happened to Sam. She had also pushed for dangerous activities, rock climbing, skydiving, even swimming with sharks on their honeymoon. "I thought she was just adventurous," Sam said, his voice hollow. "I never imagined." Ethan reached out and took his father's hand, squeezing it gently. Sam managed a small, grateful smile, comforted by his son's unwavering support. As the day wore on, more information trickled in. Officer Rivera had managed to apprehend Mark a few blocks from the church, and under questioning, Mark had quickly cracked, revealing the full extent of their plan. Grace, it turned out, wasn't even her real name. She was actually Sarah Connor, a con artist with a history of seducing wealthy men and then disappearing with their money. Mark was her longtime partner in both life and crime. They had been pulling these scams for years, but had never attempted anything as elaborate or deadly as their plan for Sam. The insurance policy Ethan had discovered was only the tip of the iceberg. Grace, or Sarah, had been working to isolate Sam from his friends and family, even manipulating him to change his will, leaving everything to her. The plan had been to stage a tragic accident on their honeymoon, collect the insurance payout and his estate, then vanish and start a new life together. As the full extent of the deception became clear, Sam's shoulders slumped, and he seemed to collapse into himself. "How could I have been so blind?" he whispered, more to himself than to Ethan or the officers. "How did I not see what was happening?" Officer Johnson, who had been taking notes quietly, looked up with sympathy. "Mr. Taylor, don't blame yourself. These people are professionals, they've done this before, and they're very skilled at manipulation. The important thing is that they didn't succeed, thanks to your son." Sam looked at Ethan with a mix of pride and lingering guilt. "You're right," he said softly. "Ethan saved my life today. I just wish I'd listened to him sooner." Ethan, feeling a surge of love for his dad, leaned into his side. "It's okay, Dad. We're okay now." As evening came, there was still no sign of Grace. She seemed to have vanished into thin air after fleeing the church. The police assured Sam and Ethan they were doing everything they could to find her, but warned them that she had experience in disappearing. "We put out an APB and alerted all local authorities," Officer Johnson said reassuringly. "We're also monitoring airports, bus stations, and car rental agencies," Officer Johnson explained. "But I have to be honest with you. She had a head start, and she knows how to cover her tracks." Sam nodded wearily. "I understand. Thank you for everything you're doing." As they prepared to leave, Officer Johnson handed Sam his card. "If you remember anything else or if Grace tries to contact you, call me immediately, day or night." Sam pocketed the card, then turned to Ethan. "Ready to go home, buddy?" Ethan nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of the day's events. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The drive home was quiet, each lost in thought. When they pulled into the driveway, Sam turned off the engine but didn't move to get out of the car. Instead, he turned to Ethan. "Ethan," he said softly, "I owe you a huge apology." Ethan looked up, surprised. "For what, Dad?" Sam sighed heavily. "For not listening to you. For not seeing how Grace was treating you. For putting you in danger by bringing her into our lives." Ethan was quiet, considering his father's words. Then, with a wisdom far beyond his years, he said, "Dad, you were just trying to be happy, and make us happy. You couldn't have known what Grace was really like." Sam's eyes welled with tears. "But I should have seen how she was affecting you. I should have noticed that you weren't happy." Ethan reached out and took his father's hand. "I didn't want to ruin things for you. You seemed so happy with her, and I thought maybe I was the problem." Sam's heart broke hearing this. He pulled Ethan into a fierce hug, not caring about the awkward angle across the seats. "Never, Ethan. You could never be the problem. You're the best thing in my life, and I'm so sorry if I ever made you feel otherwise." They sat there for a long moment, holding each other and letting the tears flow. It was a release, washing away the fear and pain of the past months. Finally, Sam pulled back, wiping his eyes. "What do you say we go inside and order a ridiculous amount of pizza? I think we've earned it." Ethan managed a small smile. "Can we get stuffed crust?" Sam laughed, the sound a little watery but genuine. "Buddy, after today you can have any kind of pizza you want." As they walked into the house, both Sam and Ethan felt a weight lift from their shoulders. The shadow of Grace, of Sarah, still loomed, but they would face it together. For now, they were home, safe, and they had each other. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Sam and Ethan's lives were turned upside down as they dealt with the aftermath of Grace's deception. There were more interviews with the police, meetings with lawyers to untangle the legal mess she'd left behind, and endless calls from friends, family, and even reporters wanting details about the dramatic wedding day. Sam did his best to shield Ethan from the worst of it, but there was no escaping the reality of their situation. Grace remained at large, seemingly vanished into thin air. The police kept Sam updated, but as days turned to weeks, hope of finding her began to fade. Mark, on the other hand, was facing the full force of the law. In exchange for a plea deal, he'd provided the police with a wealth of information about Grace's past cons and their network of associates. His testimony painted a disturbing picture of a Mark's testimony revealed a sophisticated criminal operation that had been running for years, leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts across the country. For Ethan, the aftermath of the wedding was a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. He was thankful his father was safe and that Grace was out of their lives, but he couldn't shake the worry that she might return someday for revenge. Sam noticed his son's unease and did his best to reassure him. He installed a new security system at home, complete with cameras and motion sensors, and he made sure Ethan knew he could talk to him about any worries, no matter how small. "We're a team, buddy," Sam would say, ruffling Ethan's hair with a smile. "You and me against the world. Remember?" Each time, Ethan would nod, feeling a bit safer as his father reaffirmed their bond. Slowly, as the weeks passed, life returned to a sense of normalcy. Sam threw himself into his work, taking on extra projects to stay busy, while Ethan found comfort in school routines, with classes and homework filling his days. One Saturday morning, about a month after the chaotic wedding day, Sam and Ethan were having breakfast when the doorbell rang. Sam tensed, still wary of unexpected visitors, but relaxed when he saw Jack, his best man, through the peephole. "Hey man," Jack greeted, stepping inside. "How are you guys holding up?" Sam managed a tired smile. "We're hanging in there. Come on in." Jack followed him to the kitchen, where Ethan was finishing his cereal. "Hey there, little man," Jack said, offering Ethan a fist bump. Ethan grinned and bumped Jack's fist, happy to see him. He'd always liked Jack, who treated him like an equal rather than just a kid. "So," Jack said, accepting a cup of coffee from Sam, "the guys and I have been talking, and we think it's time for you two to get out of the house for a bit. What do you say to a camping trip next weekend?" Sam hesitated, glancing at Ethan. "I don't know, Jack. After everything that's happened, that's exactly why you need this," Jack insisted. "Just a few days away from all this," he gestured around the kitchen. "No phones, no reporters, no lawyers. Just us, some tents, and the great outdoors." Ethan's face lit up. "Can we go fishing?" he asked, a spark of excitement in his eyes that Sam hadn't seen in weeks. Jack grinned. "You bet, buddy. We'll catch enough fish to feed an army." Sam looked at Ethan's hopeful expression and felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe this was what they needed. A chance to breathe and remember life as it was before Grace came into their world. "All right," he said with a smile, watching Ethan's face brighten. "Let's do it." The camping trip was exactly what Sam and Ethan needed. Away from the constant reminders of Grace's betrayal, they found themselves relaxing for the first time in months. Their days were filled with hiking, fishing, and telling stories around the campfire. Ethan loved learning how to set up a tent and roast marshmallows, while Sam rediscovered the simple joy of watching his son laugh and play without a care. On their last night in the woods, as they sat around the dying embers of the campfire, Sam pulled Ethan close. "Thank you, buddy," he said softly. Ethan looked up, meeting his father's gaze. Ethan looked up at his father, confused. "For what, Dad?" Sam smiled, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "For being you. For being brave when I couldn't see what was happening. For saving us both." Ethan snuggled closer to his father, feeling safe and loved. "We saved each other, Dad," he said wisely. As they drove home the next day, both Sam and Ethan felt renewed. The shadow of Grace lingered, but it no longer felt overwhelming. They had weathered the storm together and emerged stronger. Life began moving forward. Ethan started a new school year, diving into his studies and making new friends. With support from his therapist, Sam cautiously re-entered the dating world, though he took things very slowly. Then, 6 months after the wedding everything changed again. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Officer Johnson arrived at their door, his expression grave. "Mr. Taylor," he said as Sam invited him inside. "We found Grace." Sam's heart raced. "You've arrested her?" Officer Johnson shook his head. "No, sir. I'm afraid we found her body in a motel room just outside of Las Vegas. It appears she took her own life." The news hit Sam like a physical blow. He stumbled, steadying himself against the wall. She's dead," he whispered, barely able to speak. Officer Johnson nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. We believe she'd been there for a few days. There was a note." At that moment, Ethan came bounding down the stairs, stopping short when he saw the officer. "Dad," he asked, his voice tinged with worry. Sam turned to his son, his face pale. "Ethan, buddy, why don't you go to your room for a bit? I need to talk to Officer Johnson." Ethan hesitated, his eyes darting between his father and the officer. "Is it about Grace?" he asked softly. Sam sighed, realizing it was best to be honest with his perceptive son. "Yes, it is. Come here, buddy. We should talk about this together." As they sat in the living room, Officer Johnson explained the situation, carefully sparing Ethan the more distressing details. Grace, or Sarah, as she was truly named, had been on the run for months, always a step ahead of the law. But the pressure had finally taken its toll. In her note, Officer Johnson continued, his voice softening. She expressed remorse. She said she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. Sam sat in stunned silence, his arm around Ethan's shoulders. Ethan looked up at his father, his young face filled with concern. "Are you okay, Dad?" Sam managed a weak smile. "I don't know, buddy." A lot to process. After Officer Johnson left, promising to keep them updated, Sam and Ethan sat on the couch, both lost in thought. Finally, Ethan asked, "Do you think she really felt bad about what she did?" Sam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, buddy. People are complicated. Sometimes they do bad things and then they regret them later. But what's important is that we learn from this and move forward." The news of Grace's death marked a turning point for Sam and Ethan. While it brought a sense of closure, it also stirred complex emotions that took time to sort through. They attended counseling sessions together, learning to navigate their feelings and growing even closer. As the months passed, life settled into a new rhythm. Sam threw himself into being the best father he could be, cherishing each moment with Ethan, grateful for the strength they had found in each other. Sam also rekindled old friendships that had drifted away during his relationship with Grace, rebuilding a network of friends and support. Meanwhile, Ethan blossomed. The weight of secrecy and fear lifted. He became more outgoing at school and excelled in his studies. He developed a passion for detective novels, often joking that he already had a head start in the mystery-solving department. On the one-year anniversary of the ill-fated wedding, Sam and Ethan decided to begin a new tradition. They packed a picnic and drove to a beautiful state park, spending the day hiking, fishing, and simply enjoying each other's company. As they sat by a crystal-clear lake, watching the sunset, Sam turned to his son. "You know, Ethan," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened last year." Ethan looked up, curious. "Yeah." Sam nodded, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "What Grace did was terrible, but it taught me something important. Maybe the most important lesson of my life." "What's that, Dad?" Ethan asked. Sam smiled, ruffling Ethan's hair. "It taught me that the most important relationship in my life, the one I should always prioritize, is right here." He gently poked Ethan's chest. "You and me, buddy. We're a team, and nothing's ever going to change that." Ethan beamed, throwing his arms around his dad in a tight hug. "I love you, Dad," he murmured into Sam's shoulder. Sam hugged him close. "I love you too, kiddo," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "More than you'll ever know." As they packed up their picnic and headed home, father and son felt a deep sense of peace settle over them. The past year had been a roller coaster of betrayal, fear, and uncertainty, but it had also strengthened their bond in ways they never could have imagined. Together, they had weathered the storm and emerged stronger and closer than ever. Driving home, the setting sun painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, and both Sam and Ethan knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The story of the boy who stopped his dad's wedding had become a tale of resilience, love, and the unbreakable bond between father and son. It served as a reminder that the happiest endings sometimes don't come from fairy tale weddings, but from the simple, profound love of family. As they pulled into the driveway, Sam looked over at Ethan, who had fallen asleep during the drive. He smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. With Ethan by his side, Sam knew they could handle anything life threw their way. As stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Sam carried his sleeping son into the house, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Ethan's courage and determination to stand up for what was right hadn't only changed his father's life, but had made an impact on their entire community. By speaking up and revealing the truth about his father's fiancée, Ethan showed the power of bravery, proving that even the youngest among us can make a difference. If Ethan's story touched your heart, Make sure to subscribe for more inspiring tales. And before you go, let us know. How would you have handled the situation if you were in Ethan's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below.